Sometimes the hardest thing isn't starting, it's choosing not to walk away when everything in you whispers, "It would be easier if I just stopped." We've all stood at that edge, the edge of exhaustion, of disappointment, of fear, wondering if quitting is the only way to protect ourselves from pain. But here's the truth: not quitting doesn't mean you won't stumble. It doesn't mean you won't doubt yourself, or cry in frustration, or feel the weight of carrying something bigger than you imagine. It means you're brave enough to keep showing up, even when the outcome is uncertain. Every person in this room carries a story of resilience, of pushing through a storm you thought would break you. And that story, that strength, is proof that you are capable of more than you've ever dared to believe. So today, I invite you to lean into courage, to honor the struggle without surrendering to it, and to remember that persistence is not about perfection. It's about choosing to rise again and again when quitting seems easier. We don't often talk honestly about struggle. We brush over it, we package it neatly, or we turn it into a story we only tell once we've already made it to the other side. But in the moment, when you're right in the thick of it, struggle feels raw, heavy, and unbearably lonely. It feels like you're the only one carrying a weight so crushing that your knees buckle under it, and somehow everyone else seems to be moving with ease. And maybe that's the hardest part, when you feel like you should be stronger than you are, when you think you should be able to handle it better, when your inner voice keeps whispering, "Why can't you just keep up like everyone else?" Struggle doesn't look the same for everyone. For some, it's the quiet battles that no one sees, the late nights when you're replaying every choice you've made, wondering if you messed everything up. For others, it's the visible kind, the failures that happen in front of an audience, the setbacks that are impossible to hide. And whether it's loud or silent, it carries the same weight, that aching temptation to quit, that pull to just put the dream down and walk away because carrying it feels like too much. But what's important to understand is that acknowledging struggle isn't weakness, it's courage. It takes a deep kind of honesty to say, "This is hard, I am tired, I don't know if I can keep going." That moment of naming the truth about where you are is not giving up. It's the very opposite. It's the act of refusing to numb yourself or to pretend your struggle doesn't exist. It's standing in your own humanity and saying, "Yes, this hurts. Yes, this is overwhelming. And yes, I'm still here." Too often we think strength means never bending, never faltering, never showing cracks. But real strength looks a lot messier. Real strength is the person who wakes up after a night of doubt and still tries again in the morning. It's the one who admits they're scared and then takes a step forward anyway. It's the person who feels the weight of failure pressing down on their chest and still chooses not to set their dream aside. That's what acknowledging struggle makes possible. It allows you to see yourself not as someone broken, but as someone in process, someone learning, someone still moving. And here's the quiet truth we often forget. Everybody struggles. The people you admire, the ones you think have it all figured out, they've had moments when they wanted to throw it all away. They've sat with the same questions, the same self-doubt, the same exhaustion that you feel. The difference isn't that they never struggled. The difference is they didn't let the struggle decide the ending of their story. Acknowledging your own struggle puts you in touch with that shared humanity. It reminds you that you're not the only one stumbling, that you're not weaker or less capable because it feels hard right now. Struggle is part of the path, not a sign you should turn back. And when you stop pretending it doesn't exist, when you stop fighting to look strong and start being honest about the weight you're carrying, you open the door to something far more powerful than pretending to be unshaken. You open the door to resilience. There's a moment we don't like to talk about. The moment when quitting feels like the most logical, even the safest choice. It's not because we're lazy, and it's not because we lack ambition. It's because fear and failure have a way of getting under our skin and convincing us that walking away is the only way to protect ourselves. Vulnerability lives right there in that space. It shows up when the dream you've been holding starts to feel too big, when the risk feels too costly, when the thought of putting yourself out there again feels unbearable. And it whispers, "If you quit now, you won't have to feel this anymore." But here's the thing, vulnerability isn't weakness. It's not the enemy. Vulnerability is the truth teller. It strips away the polished version of ourselves and leaves us exposed. Our insecurities, our doubts, our hopes all laid bare. And that exposure can feel terrifying. That's why so many of us reach for quitting, because quitting feels like control. It feels like choosing comfort over uncertainty. Yet every time we lean into that urge, every time we step back from vulnerability, we rob ourselves of the chance to grow into the person we're meant to become. Think about it. Every significant thing you've ever done, every risk, every love, every leap, it started with vulnerability. It started with a willingness to show up without guarantees. When you applied for that job not knowing if you were qualified, when you confessed how you really felt to someone who could have rejected you, when you took the first step into something you had no map for, that was vulnerability leading the way. And if you think back, those moments weren't signs of weakness. They were moments of incredible courage. The temptation to quit usually comes hand in hand with vulnerability because when you're daring something bold, the stakes feel high. You're suddenly aware of how much you care, how much it matters, how devastating it would be if it didn't work out. That awareness is what makes you human, but it's also what makes you want to shield yourself from hurt. Vulnerability is saying, I'm willing to care anyway. I'm willing to show up, even if it doesn't work out. And that is never easy. It's uncomfortable. It's messy. It's exposing. But it's also the birthplace of courage, creativity, and resilience. So when quitting feels tempting, what you're really wrestling with is not just exhaustion or fear. You're wrestling with vulnerability itself. You're facing that raw place in yourself that says, if I keep going, I could fail. If I keep going, people could see me fall apart. If I keep going, I might have to admit I'm not as strong as I want to be. And that's where the shift happens. Because in that exact space, you get to choose whether vulnerability shuts you down or whether it opens you up to a deeper, truer version of yourself. Every story of someone who didn't quit, every story of resilience and breakthrough, has vulnerability woven all through it. They didn't keep going because they were fearless. They kept going because they chose not to hide from the uncertainty. They chose to stand in it, shaky and unsure, and keep showing up anyway. That's the quiet, gritty kind of bravery that vulnerability asks of us. When we think about resilience, we often picture something rigid, like steel that doesn't bend or a wall that doesn't crack no matter what it faces. But resilience is not about being unshaken or untouchable. Resilience is softer, more human, and a lot messier than that. It's not about standing tall without wavering. It's about falling flat on your face, feeling the sting of failure, and still finding the courage to rise again. It's about bending so you don't break. It's about knowing that even if life knocks the wind out of you, there is still a breath left to take, and that breath is enough to try one more time. We don't become resilient because life is easy. We become resilient because life is hard. Because things don't go according to plan. Because the people we counted on sometimes let us down. Because doors slam shut when we thought they'd swing wide open. Every disappointment, every mistake, every heartbreak, these are the classrooms where resilience is built. And while none of us sign up for those lessons, they are the very experiences that shape us into who we are. Resilience doesn't erase the pain. It doesn't mean you're immune to disappointment or that you'll never struggle again. It means you know how to keep going in the presence of pain. It means you've learned the art of carrying your scars with grace, of letting them remind you not of where you broke, but of how you healed. There's a quiet dignity in resilience. It doesn't shout. It doesn't need to prove itself. It just keeps moving, step by shaky step, until one day you look back and realize how far you've come. The power of resilience lies in its ability to transform how we see ourselves. When you get up after falling, you begin to understand that you are not defined by the fall itself, but by the rise. You start to believe that maybe you are stronger than you thought, maybe more capable than you gave yourself credit for. And that shift is everything. Because once you see yourself as someone who can endure, someone who can bend and not break, you stop fearing failure in the same way. You know you'll stumble, but you also know you'll get back up. Think of the people you admire most. Rarely do we admire them because they lived lives free of challenge or failure. We admire them because they faced struggles, sometimes devastating ones, and they kept going. Their resilience became their legacy. And the truth is, you carry that same potential. Resilience is not reserved for a chosen few. It's something we all carry inside us, waiting to be called forward. There will be times when you feel completely emptied, like there's nothing left to give. But resilience teaches you that even when you feel like you're at the end, there is still a small piece of strength hidden deep within you, a flicker that can grow into a flame if you choose not to give up. That flicker is what makes it possible to keep moving through the darkest nights until the morning light finally comes. There's something powerful about the stories we carry, our own stories and the stories of others. They remind us that we're not alone, that the path of perseverance is not just for the extraordinary, but for the ordinary people who choose to keep going even when life gives them 1,000 reasons to stop. Human stories have a way of grounding us in reality while also lifting us toward hope. Because when we see someone else overcome what looked impossible, it sparks the thought that maybe we can too. Think of the countless times you've heard about someone who was on the edge of quitting but chose differently. The student who failed the same exam 3 times and almost gave up on their dream career, only to pass on the 4th attempt and go on to help thousands. The single parent who worked long nights and early mornings, juggling exhaustion and sacrifice to make sure their children had opportunities they never had. Or the artist who faced rejection after rejection until finally one person believed in their work, and that changed everything. These are not distant stories of superheroes. They are stories of people who felt the weight of quitting and chose to hold on a little longer. What makes these stories resonate is not perfection, but the imperfection. It's the doubt, the fear, the brokenness, the tears we don't often see in highlight reels. It's the fact that someone we admire once stood in a place that looks a lot like where we're standing now, confused, tired, and ready to let go. And instead of letting that moment define them, they pushed through. That's the thread that binds us together, the shared experience of being human. Our own stories, too, hold that kind of power. Sometimes we underestimate them because they don't look grand or dramatic. But each time you faced something that could have broken you and you kept moving, you wrote a story worth telling. Every chapter of survival, every moment of resilience, every time you whispered to yourself, "Not today, I won't quit," you were crafting a narrative that can encourage someone else down the road. You may not even realize it, but someone needs your story. Someone needs to hear how you survived the storm so they can believe they can survive theirs. Human stories remind us that we are built to endure, to rise, and to find meaning even in hardship. They are evidence that pain doesn't have to be the end of the story. It can be the middle, the turning point, the chapter that makes the ending richer. And when you hear these stories, when you see yourself reflected in them, quitting begins to feel less like the only option and more like a temptation you can resist. We are all walking libraries of resilience, carrying stories of struggle and triumph that deserve to be shared. And every time one of us chooses not to quit, that story becomes another lantern for the rest of us, lighting the way when the road feels too dark. Courage is not the absence of fear. Courage is what rises in the middle of fear when your voice shakes, your knees tremble, and your heart feels heavy, but you still take a step forward. It's not loud, it's not always dramatic, and it doesn't always come with applause. Most of the time, courage is quiet. It's that one decision you make when nobody is watching, when you're face to face with quitting, and you choose instead to stay in the fight, to keep going one more day. We often think of courage as something reserved for big, world-changing moments, but it shows up in the ordinary spaces of life. It's in the student who raises their hand, even though they're terrified of being wrong. It's in the person who starts over at 40, building a life from scratch because the one they had fell apart. It's in the small, almost invisible acts of persistence, the job application sent after 100 rejections, the run taken after weeks of staying in bed, the conversation started that could lead to healing. These are the quiet acts of courage that keep the world turning, that remind us what it means to not quit even when giving up feels safer. When quitting feels tempting, it's rarely because we've lost the ability. More often, it's because we're scared. Scared of failing, scared of being judged, scared of investing ourselves fully and discovering it wasn't enough. And that's where courage becomes so vital. Courage doesn't take the fear away, but it teaches us to carry it differently. To say, yes, I'm afraid. Yes, I might fall. Yes, this might not work out the way I hoped, but I'm going to show up anyway. That's the kind of courage that keeps dreams alive. Courage is an invitation we receive every single day, often in moments so small we overlook them. Every time you wake up and choose to keep moving forward, even when the odds seem stacked against you, you've accepted that invitation. Every time you admit the truth about how much something matters to you, even though saying it out loud makes you vulnerable, you've accepted that invitation. Every time you take the next step, even when you don't know if the ground will hold, you've accepted that invitation. And the beautiful thing about courage is that it multiplies. One act of courage creates room for another. The first step gives way to the second. The shaky voice eventually grows steadier. The trembling hands become stronger. Courage isn't something you're born with. It's something you grow into by choosing again and again not to let fear or doubt make the final decision. There will always be moments when quitting whispers in your ear, telling you it would be easier to stop. But in that same moment, courage is whispering to you, asking you to stay, to rise, to trust that you are stronger than you feel right now. And when you accept that invitation to courage, you give yourself the chance to discover not just what you're capable of, but who you're meant to become.